Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to our library research workshop. It's a true pleasure to see you all this morning here from Cambridge. My name is Johannes Makar, and I'm a PhD candidate in NELC at Harvard and help coordinate this workshop. A quick practical note before we get started: the session is being recorded and will be followed by a Q&A at the end. You are welcome to post your questions at any time in the chat as we proceed. However, we appreciate that you keep your microphones muted until we reach the Q&A, at which point we'll ask you to use the raise hand function. Finally, if you're able to, I'd like to encourage you to join us with your cameras on, as it always adds some warmth to this Zoom world. Also be reminded that you can change the screen mode if you want to see just the speakers by themselves. You can press the speaker mode. As many of you know, our workshop aims to spotlight remarkable library collections, especially those relevant to the study of the Islamic world. And we're very pleased to host today the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, commonly known as Himmel. Himmel, located at St. John's University in Minnesota, preserves and makes accessible the largest and most diverse collection of online manuscript images in the world, with approximately 300,000 imaged manuscripts, especially handwritten collections from endangered communities. Himmel has, for more than 55 years now, led an undertaking that will offer an immeasurable contribution to many generations to come. Needless to say that I'm filled with honor to welcome our eight distinguished speakers today. Joshua, would you like to take it further from here?
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction, Johannes. And I'm glad to see so many people here today. It's very encouraging. And thank you for inviting us to give this presentation here. I actually did my master's at the Harvard Divinity School, so I'm glad to be back virtually. But just to give you a quick overview, we're going to have a number of presentations here about the various ways that Himmel's resources can offer useful tools for people involved in Islamic studies. And then you're welcome to put questions in the chat if you have them, or at the end we'll have a more dedicated Q&A time with the raise hand feature and that sort of thing. So our speakers today will be Columba Stewart, our Executive Director, Catherine Walsh, the Director of Cataloging, myself, Joshua Mugler, I'm the Curator of Islamic Manuscripts. David Calabro is Curator of Eastern Christian Manuscripts. Daniel Gullo is Director of the Malta Study Center. And then our catalogers of Islamic manuscripts are Celeste, Gianni, Paul Naylor, and Ali Diakite. So to start out, I would like to hand it over to our Executive Director, Columba Stewart, for a little introduction to who we are and what we do.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Josh. My job is to give you a quick introduction to what Himmel is, how we do our work, and how we got involved in Islamic manuscripts, and then to get out of the way so that you can hear the really interesting input from our various curators and catalogers here. So I'm going to do this by sharing screen and just give you a few slides that will provide that overview for you. So the first thing is to give you some sense of our history. Johannes mentioned we were founded 55 years ago, 1965. And the original mission, since the project was begun by a Benedictine monastery here in Minnesota, a monastery of which I am a member, I'm one of the monks here. The original mission was to microfilm monastic manuscripts in Europe in the Cold War, when there was still fear of a World War III and a nuclear conflict, and one that might completely destroy cultural heritage. And particularly from a monastic perspective, medieval manuscripts in monastic libraries in places like Austria, which were very much contested ground during that era. In the early 1970s, the project unexpectedly expanded to a truly extraordinary project, microfilming Christian manuscripts in Ethiopia precisely at the time of the Ethiopian Revolution and then Civil War. And as Europe gradually acquired the resources, funding, skills to do all of its own manuscript photography, whether microfilm or digitizing, our focus shifted to places which really needed our resources and our technology. And we thought about the experience of the Cold War, of Ethiopia, and the focus on manuscripts in locations where they were thought to be at risk became a principal guide for our determining where we would go in terms of our, by this time, digitizing work. So 2003, started work in the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Turkey, etc. Also working in Southwest India. All of these were Eastern Christian manuscript collections, including the work in Kerala in India, home of the St. Thomas Christian tradition. But we sort of kind of accidentally, and then decided to make it deliberate, made an expansion to working with Islamic manuscript collections. And I'll tell you in a minute exactly how that happened. But it's actually become the largest portion of our current digitizing work. And you'll get some idea of the scale when you hear from our curators and catalogers. So that happened in 2012 officially. And then in 2016, we launched the online reading room. And that's, of course, where you can access these things. And you'll hear more about that in the course of our presentations this morning. So this is what it looked like in the beginning, you know, out in front of one of those great Baroque Austrian monasteries in the mid-60s, the VW bus with microfilming equipment, stacks of Latin medieval manuscripts piled on the floor, waiting to be microfilmed. Great start. But of course, this is how we tend to do it now. So this is one of the digitizers in Mali, working with some of those West African manuscripts you'll hear about later. It's a digital camera, it's all run through a laptop, and then we have all of the associated challenges of data processing, archiving, et cetera, et cetera. So what we do now is just a technological development of what we've always done. We partner with other libraries to digitize, archive, and share manuscripts. The focus is typically on manuscript codices, although we have done some very important archival work in certain locations where that made sense. We focus on regions where manuscripts are thought to be endangered, or if not endangered, they are inaccessible. They're a private library, they're in a church or monastery, which does not have facilities to welcome visiting researchers, etc. We provide the equipment for the work, we train local people to do it, and we pay them for the work that they do to digitize. And of course, a copy of all of the images goes with the owners. Our promise to them is that we will safely archive permanently the digital data, share the images online, and provide supporting tools for research. And one of the things we've learned, sadly, in the course of work in places in the Middle East particularly, is we also track the changing status of collections as they are moved, as they are even destroyed. So our basic approach is to photograph whole collections. We don't cherry pick manuscripts we like because we don't know what people are going to be interested in the future. We prefer to cover regions rather than isolated collections so that there's a more comprehensive view of the intellectual culture. We now work across religious and linguistic boundaries within regions, again, to capture the best sense of the broader, richer, and more complex intellectual culture. And we follow text and manuscripts along pathways of transmission as they go into different languages, as traditions move and expand from their starting point. Now, when we come to the Islamic manuscript work of Himmel, the real turn began in Ethiopia. I mentioned earlier that we had worked in Ethiopia in the 1970s doing microfilming. We've gone back in the digital era for a few projects here and there. But one of our colleagues had developed a close relationship with Abdullahi Ali Sharif. And maybe some of you know him, maybe you've been to Harar, maybe you specialize in that particular Islamic culture. But Abdullahi is a great character who's collected many manuscripts from shrines and mosques of Harar, that great historic center of Ethiopian Islam, gathered them into a museum. he sent some workers to one of our digitization workshops in Addis Ababa, and then asked us if we could preserve the data. So we thought about it, sure, no big deal to preserve his data. So we did. The real turn came in Jerusalem. We had been working with Christian collections at, beginning with St. Mark's Monastery in the Armenian quarter of the Old City. A Palestinian Christian worked for us as our field director. He was very good friends with members of some of the most important and historic Muslim families of Jerusalem. You'll be hearing more about them later. And so one of them asked, well, why don't we digitize their manuscript collection? And we thought about it and we thought it made sense. This was, what, a couple hundred yards from St. Mark's Monastery. These libraries had coexisted for quite some time. The people had interacted in various ways. They may have read each other's texts and argued and so on. So we said, yeah, let's do it. So we did. And so that was really the big turn. And this photo is from the window of the digitizing studio in the Bouderi Family Library. So it's a pretty incredible location. The largest single project, as you'll hear currently, is the work in Mali. And all of you know the story of the manuscripts evacuated from Timbuktu ahead of the takeover of the city by what they call jihadis in 2012. There are various accounts of this evacuation of manuscripts. The bottom line for our purposes is, yes, they did take out literally boatloads of manuscripts. And so 1,400 metal boxes like you see here with manuscripts taken to the capital in Bamako, which have since been unpacked, being digitized, and then our brave catalogers working on them. We also have worked up in Timbuktu with collections that were not evacuated. And so this was moving to other parts of Mali. And then most recently, a continuation of an earlier project in Gianni, with manuscripts belonging to families and now surrounding villages of Gianni, to capture that second center of Malian Islam. When you add all this up, and these numbers are provisional, they sort of change all the time, you get some idea of the scale of things we're talking about here. From that earlier beginning with Abdullahi Ali Sharif and Harar, then Jerusalem, the work we're doing in northern India and now Pakistan, the work in Mali, that's a lot of stuff. And eventually all of it feeds into the Himmel reading room online. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about that in the course of the remarks today. And so one last thing for me, how do we do it? We do it because of these people. We are definitely a not-for-profit organization. We're supported entirely by philanthropy, grants from major foundations like you see here on the slide, generous individuals. We do have an endowment that funds about 25% of our current operations, which means we have a certain base level of sustainability. But obviously our interest in the long term is building up that endowment so that we can continue at a high level of activity for the very long term. And you can always find out more by checking us out online at hmml.org and at vhmml.org for the online reading room. So now we'll go to the main event, which is hearing about what's actually in these collections. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Father Columba. We want to turn now to Catherine Walsh, our Director of Cataloging, who will share a little bit about some of the authority work that we're doing and how that will benefit the field of Islamic studies. So, Catherine.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Unlike many of the other scholars here, I am not a medievalist or an Islamicist. I am a librarian and an art historian, but I do work that has to do with some of the background work that provides shareability and accountability and as well sort of authoritative nature to our data. So As Father Columba mentioned, we do a lot. Our cataloging production is massive. So visiting Himmel from month to month, you'll find thousands of new records because right now we have many catalogers working. But also, as Father Columba indicated, there is a lot more to go and a lot more that will be coming. For instance, we have thousands and thousands of manuscripts from Mali and Timbuktu and Bamako that are on their way thanks to the dedicated work of our catalogers. In presenting that information to the public, we make sure that we adhere to metadata standards. So resource description and access, also the metadata standards of the rare books and manuscripts section of the ACRL, library organizations, trying to make sure that our data is shareable and that it will be recognizable to everybody. People will be able to align our data with their own and do some work in digital humanities, for instance. And part of the way we do that is by creating authorities for individuals and titles. And I just want to share how those work in Himmel before I turn things over to the people you want to hear from more about the collection. So for instance, this is a manuscript that Dr. Mugler cataloged, and you can see that we created authorities for it. And here's the one that we created. We created a title here that by following it, you can take it, it'll take you to other copies of this work in our collection. You can find other works by the same author in our collection as well. And beyond that, it will also take you to the Library of Congress, and also from there or from our catalog, you can go and see the same record in VIAF. So it's shared internationally and nationally and searchable in all these platforms because we are contributing to the Library of Congress when we create authorities. Now, I wanted to let you know that these authorities are backed up by a great deal of research on the part of our catalogers who are viewing the manuscripts and cataloging them firsthand, well, digitally firsthand. Nobody has the manuscripts in front of them. And here is one that was cataloged by Celeste Gianni, who you will hear from in a few minutes, from the Church of the 40 Martyrs collection in the Middle East as well, and in Mardin, I believe, Turkey. And this one, this is a name I just created for her this morning. So these names are coming out and being shared and accessible so you can find them and find work from them. And they are based upon not only the manuscript, but they do additional research as well to find out how they've been treated in other sources. And then we establish a controlled name form that makes it easier to search and find things. Now, as Columba Stewart mentioned, we are funded by foundations, including an NEH grant that we were awarded last year in January. And it has, one, enabled us to hire additional catalogers, and also enabled us to develop this very prototype project. It is not full of data yet, it is not publicly launched yet, but I wanted to share it with you because I think it will provide a lot of avenue for future research for you. So this is our Himmel authority file where we are sharing our data that sort of enables our cataloging and can help others to identify manuscripts, people, and links between them. Right now, the data is very new in it. We've only got, as you can see, the A names in so far from the Islamic collections. But for each of these individuals, we will have information about them, their life, their death, citations for it. And you can also search for people in advanced and interesting ways. So for instance, say you want to find a person from the 18th century named Effendi, you can find those people, right? Or say, oh, I got the century wrong. I actually want to find somebody from the 15th century. There you go. All right, and this will get much more complicated as we go forward and get more of our data in here. But I wanted to show you, thanks to the work of our catalogers, I believe everybody here has contributed to this by finding examples of manuscripts. So here is an important work that I'm sure you're all familiar with by Bukhari, of a collection of Hadith, a very important collection of Hadith. And I wanted to show you some of the capabilities of what this will be able to do in the future. So first of all, you'll be able to search by the incipit, right? So say you want to take this incipit and search up here. You can find it, right? Or other things with the similar incipits, in case you have one that they vary a little bit from manuscript to manuscript. This will also provide you data based on our collections about other related works. For instance, we have a list of people who have commented on this, people who have abridged it, and here are those works as well. So for instance, we have here an abridgment of Bukhari's Hadith collection. And this, in fact, also has commentaries on it. So you can find those as well. So here is a commentary, his own commentary on the work. Or you can go back to another commentary on it as well. And you can also navigate around by looking at related records. So you can see, for instance, from Bukhari, you can see how pervasive he is to the collection, that there are 11 works related to this. And there will, of course, be more over time, right? This is just a carefully curated nest to show you the capabilities. And we'll also be linking to other institutions. So here's his record in Wikidata. This will have an API, so you can use digital humanities tools to pull the data, to download the data, to use, to analyze it in various ways, if that is how you like to do your scholarship. So we're very excited about this, and a lot of labor from a lot of hands has gone into it, curating the data for it, and painstaking analysis of manuscripts to find the data in the first place. And now I will turn this over again to the curators who can talk more about the collections.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, we're very excited about the work that's being done on the Himmel Authority file, and hopefully it will be becoming more public very soon. So I want to just give you kind of a, Columba already gave kind of an overview of some of the places that we've worked, and I want to just give you a little bit more detail about that. And then we'll have some of the catalogers speak in more detail on some specific collections. But just to kind of touch on the broad picture of where we have digitized and or microfilmed manuscripts. First of all is Jerusalem, and there are 4 collections there that we've digitized: the Khalidi Library, the Budayri Library, the Isaf Nishashabi Cultural Center, and the Zawiya al-Uzbekiya, the Uzbek Sufi Center there, which is the collection of Abdulaziz al-Bukhari. So these are all digital. They're all available on the Himmel Reading Room, as Father Columba was showing you. As you would expect in Jerusalem, it's mostly Arabic, and then has a variety of other languages. For example, the Uzbek Center has some connections to Central Asia, of course, so there's some Chagatai and Uzbek in there. They all have a little bit of Ottoman Turkish and so on. And we're happy to announce that the cataloging was recently completed on these 4 collections, and Celeste will be able to give you more information about that very soon. And then from Mali, from Timbuktu, we have several tens of thousands of manuscripts already online, digitized, but many, many more. Columba already showed you some of the numbers, hundreds of thousands of manuscripts that are being digitized, being added to the online system, being cataloged. And Ali and Paul will be able to tell you more about that in just a minute. So then there are some projects that are kind of affiliated with us where we host their images, but have not done the actual photography ourselves or the cataloging. And so the Zaidi Manuscript Tradition Project is from the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. And these images are all on the Himmel system, but there's limited cataloging. So some of them might have just sort of title in native script, that sort of thing. But it is possible to go and browse through, through the search system. You can find the different libraries. These are this is an attempt to capture all of the Zaidi collections from around the world. So several are in Yemen still, but then there are other collections from places like Vienna or Rome, various places in Germany. So that is there, hosted on our site, but kind of in partnership with this other project, and they'll hopefully be doing some work on that as it goes forward. And then a similar project is the Dream Sea project, which is Southeast Asian manuscripts and includes a large number of Islamic manuscripts from Indonesia primarily. And this is on a separate website called Himmel Cloud, himmelcloud.org, but you can find those and browse through them. And again, there's kind of minimal cataloging there, but you will be able to find, some things by, for example, this text here is in Arabic with interlinear Javanese translation, I believe. So those are available too. They just kind of take a little bit of work to get there. So, part of what I want to say is just that in addition to the photography, there's a lot of cataloging that goes into all this. And so that's part of how we make it available easily so that it can be searched and so that all of those connections that Catherine was talking about are possible. But that's an ongoing project. And so some of these have more complete or less complete cataloging on them. And we're doing that work, as Catherine said, all the time. Other collections we have, as Columba mentioned, these manuscripts from Ethiopia, mostly from Harar, although a good number of them are now in Addis Ababa. And there's an example here of a Quran in the middle of the screen. And mostly Arabic. There's also a good amount of Harari in there, and some Oromo and other languages. But you can find those by browsing, looking for Ethiopia. And these are digitized. We have really massive collections of Ethiopian Christian manuscripts that are mostly microfilm, but these we actually have digital images for. And then David Calabro will talk about this a little later, but there's a significant number of Islamic manuscripts that you'll be able to find in the collections that belong to Christian organizations in the Middle East and elsewhere. This includes places like the Bibliothèque Orientale at Université Saint Joseph in Beirut, but also includes a number of churches and monasteries. Basically, any Christian collection in the Middle East is likely to have some Islamic material in it. It may be things like grammar or some very basic kind of legal texts. On the right side of the screen here, there's an example of a commentary by Ibn Rushd on a medical poem by Ibn Sina, all in Arabic, but except for the heading at the top, it's all written in Garshuni, so it's in Syriac script. So sometimes you'll find them like that, where they were actually copied by Christians using the Syriac script because that's what they were more familiar with, but you'll also find just regular Arabic and there's some Turkish and that sort of thing. David will give you more information on that. But then there's also the Western European collections, and this is a very different situation because these are almost entirely microfilmed as opposed to digitized. These were things that we were photographing back in the 70s and other periods before we moved on to digital technology. And so they're more difficult to access. If you want to see these collections, you have to either come here to Minnesota, and hopefully that will be possible again very soon. But they can be scanned for a fee if you would like to get the images. And we do also have research fellowships available for people who want to come and just work in those collections. And it is a very substantial amount of material, especially from the Austrian National Library, where there's over 3,000 Islamic manuscripts. And I'm working on cataloging those microphones now. There are about 250 of those that overlap with the Zaidi Manuscript Tradition Project. And so they've been scanned and they're online. But then there is thousands more that are only available in microfilm. And so that's where we have really strong holdings in Ottoman Turkish, especially literary works, poems, and that sort of thing. But there's also a lot of Arabic and Persian and various other languages, Urdu, Bosnian, Albanian, and so on. But that's, if you want to come to Minnesota, there's plenty of microphones down there that can be worked through. There's a lot of material there. And then just the ongoing work that we're doing. There is digitization happening right now in Karachi, in Gaza, other places around the world. We are working on a very large collection of mostly Urdu manuscripts from Karachi that will eventually work their way into our system, but the work goes on, and you know, there's always more being added and more being cataloged, and so you know, we're continuing to add more and more resources to our collections and to you know, hopefully make those available to the wider world. So now I want to turn it over for some more specifics on some of these collections, especially the ones that have had the most work done on them. And so I'm going to start with Celeste Gianni, who will tell you about the Jerusalem collection.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today representing Himmel work in the digitization and cataloging of the Arabic and Islamic manuscripts from Jerusalem. I'm actually speaking to you from Fano, my hometown, from the Biblioteca of Federico, the Federiciana Biblioteca here in Fano. And it is a virtual space that I can share with you exactly because of this situation, but let's make the most of it. And today, as Josh said and introduced, very generally the cataloging of the Islamic manuscript in Jerusalem, I would like to take the opportunity to show you how to use the Himmel, so the virtual platform of Himmel for the digitization of manuscript, to do specific research on 4 libraries in Jerusalem that otherwise would be basically impossible or very, very difficult to do if you were to go even physically on those spaces. So what are the potential of this platform for you as researchers in order to figure out the manuscript culture of Jerusalem? I will share with you a presentation in order to introduce you to the context of this collection. Himmel has fully digitized or almost fully digitized 4 collections in Jerusalem that are all have all been established during the late Ottoman period or Ottoman period. So we are in the 17th and 18th century, and were family libraries, because during the Ottoman period, Jerusalem was not a major center as Damascus or Cairo, but still the families of notables of the city were active in the political life of the city. Can you see the second slide? Because I don't seem to go to the second slide. Oh, yes. Okay, now I'm there. The 4 libraries that have been digitized are the Khalidi Library, the Al-Budairi Library, and the Isaf Nashashibi Library. That includes the collection of the Al-Husseini family. as well as the Zawiya al-Uzbekiyya that was established in the 18th century by a member of the Al-Bukhari family that moved from Uzbekistan in the 17th century to Jerusalem, and still is present in Jerusalem till now as the Uzbek Sufi center. These families were not disconnected from each other, and actually what the digitization of this manuscript allows us to look at is these libraries as a phenomenon of the manuscript library and the manuscript culture at the time in Jerusalem. Basically, what we can see and what we can search thanks to the cataloging, Josh cataloged the Khalidi and the Al-Budairi collection, and I completed the Isaf Nashashibi and the Zawiya al-Uzbekiyya. It is through the cataloging and the research by certain features that distinguish this collection that we can really start to understand the culture, the manuscript culture of Jerusalem at the time, and not only focus on certain specific manuscript, but really looking at historical events that otherwise would be very, very difficult to grasp without the possibility of comparing so many manuscripts and so many information at the same time from one platform. So first of all, as you will see, if we analyze the date range of the manuscripts that have been produced in Jerusalem and that are held in this library from Himmel, we will see that they mostly have manuscripts that were composed between the 16th and 18th and 19th century, meaning that when these collections were established, they were actually meant to be collections of used as to produce scholarship that was necessary for the lives of this family at the time. Hence, we have a predominance of theological work, Islamic law works in fiqh and Islamic topics related to Islamic law. Also other topics as scientific topics are featured in these collections, but there is a predominance of Islamic law, theology, and also Arabic grammar studies. It is also not as a surprise, it doesn't come as a surprise that the majority of manuscripts held in these libraries are written in the Arabic language, with some in Ottoman Turkish, Persian, and also Uzbek and Chagatai. But I would like to give you some ideas for potential research that, in my opinion, must be carried out sooner or later based on what you can find in Himmel in regard to this collection. So there are, say, 4 points today that I'd like to suggest among the really infinite options and possibility that Himmels offer. That is, for example, look at the manuscript culture in Ottoman Jerusalem by searching by some names of scribes, owners, and compilers of the manuscripts, or looking for some specific topics in the field of Islamic law. And there are some very interesting treatises and short treatises that have been digitized, or search by specific languages or script or manuscripts. And of course, if, for example, you are specializing in Islamic art, looking for manuscripts that are illustrated or that have certain decorations, because again, based on a focused research on the manuscript of these 4 collections, you can grasp an idea of a place and a time where these collections were formed that can tell us a story of the manuscript culture and how manuscripts were used and meant to be used at the time, as well as how these collections developed until they became right now very important for the preservation of the heritage of the Arabic Islamic heritage of the Palestinian families that established these collections since the 17th century. So I'm going to share with you now the reading room. And it's give you some kind of guidance on how to navigate through the collection. So first of all, when you find yourself in reading room, you need to create an account. So create an account first, and then you can access most of the manuscripts that are here. And to search by the specific collections in Jerusalem, a very easy thing is to choose the cities Jerusalem, and then in the repository menu, you can find the list of the libraries. In this case, I would like to start by searching for the name of the founder of the Al-Budairi library, that is Mohammed Al-Budairi, in the Al-Budairi library. So am I typing? I'm not typing in Arabic. So if we search, so I typed name in this field. I could also have typed it in the name field with also a date, perhaps, that is his death date when he died. And as in the results, what I get are the manuscripts that were composed by the founder of the person that established these collections originally of the Al-Budairi family. And what does this give? This fact gives me the opportunity to understand a crucial element of the manuscript culture of the time. The people that were collecting manuscript weren't just manuscript collectors, but they were also active producers of scholarship in that particular field. So for example, we know that Muhammad al-Budairi was a Sufi scholar, but if we just not limit our research in the Budairi family, but for example, we look in the Isafna Shashibi family library, where the Husseini collection is held for the same name, Al-Budairi, we actually come across other titles. So if we go to this particular manuscript, we can see that a manuscript of Muhammad ibn Budair, of the Budairi family, was also part of another collection of the Al-Husseini family. This connection between the families of Ottoman Jerusalem and how they exchange texts and how they shared scholarship, it's one of the things that really should be looked at more carefully. I've just used now one of the main names of the family, Al-Budairi. I could also search for Al-Husseini, just to give you an idea, not just of the authors of work, but also, so if I search for Al-Husseini, that is the name of another of the families in Jerusalem that which collection is represented in the Isafna Shashibi library, but I look in the Al-Budairi library to see if there are some manuscripts in other libraries that belong to the Husseini family or they were compiled by the Husseini family. I found again many and several manuscripts that feature this particular name. It could be as a waqf note, so Al-Husseini family member was owning this particular manuscript at a certain time, and then somehow it ended in the Al-Budairi family, or it could be copied by a member of the Husseini family, or it could have been compiled by a member of the Husseini family. All these let's say transactions of manuscript and movements of manuscript can be tracked in Himmel. Let's say I doubt that anyone would be able to track this type of movements or this type of notes if they were to visit the libraries and look at the manuscript one by one and take notes. These are the potential of the virtual space of reading room that allows endless types of research in this sense. And not only if we look at copies or names of author and so on, but for example, if we look at specific manuscripts, there is one interesting example of a manuscript that has been split in 2 parts. So one part is in the Isaf Nashashibi Center, and the other part is at the Zawiya al-Uzbekiyya. To physically, to consult these 2 manuscripts together, you will have to go to the library, first to one and then to the other, or take photocopies or photos and so on. But in Himmel, you can put together these 2 manuscripts again. They were the same manuscript, but they were taken apart. And you can look at them once again together. So in this case, it's a commentary of a grammar work that is the Alfiya ibn Malik. So in the page of this, where this commentary is, you will find that the missing part of this manuscript is included in the project, and this is the project number that identifies a specific manuscript from the Isaf Nashashibi library. Once you have this project number, you can search for that project number, which I have already opened. You can click on this button, copy this link. So this is quite a specific procedure. So if you have any doubt at any point, you can always email any one of us and ask us how to do this process. And then add a slot. And when you add a slot and add an item, copy the link here, load the manuscript. And here you have them back together as they originally were, but of course, in a virtual space, which I find very poetic in itself, like this possibility of a reunion of 2 parts of a split manuscript. So this is another, I'm not sure I have any more time because there are lots of examples. I wanted to show you also how to search for script or language. I don't know, Josh, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do that briefly, that's fine.
Okay, so just to close, let's close with a very nice manuscript from the Al-Budairi collection. This is just to say that one possible research that you could do is to check, for example, which North African manuscripts are represented in the libraries in Jerusalem. So as a matter of fact, in the Al-Budairi collection, there are several manuscripts from North Africa. An easy way to check that is, again, you check on the city of Jerusalem on the Al-Budairi repository, and you can select the script. Let me cancel here. The script Maghrebi, which is the script that usually is associated to North African manuscripts. Click on the search button, and in the results, you will get all the manuscripts that are in Maghrebi script at the Al-Budairi repository. So there is one that is really, really nice. If I find it in the list, maybe is this the one? Yes. That features. So if you click on gallery view, you can access the images of the manuscripts and browse all the images at the same time without having to go page by page. And I find this script, Maghrebi script example with this decoration very appealing to the eye. So I just wanted to conclude this talk with this brief image, but really you can search also by language. So for example, you could look for Uzbek text that are at the Uzbek Zawiya al-Uzbekiyya, and by topic and so on. For just to actually the last thing that I'm gonna do is to show you, if you want to look in the Isaf Nashashibi library that is characterized by numerous composite work, so Majamia, made of different treatises. Because the treatises have been cataloged one by one, you could really start to look into very detailed items and very detailed topics. Like, for example, if you search for the word turban in title, you will find treatises that deal with the treatise on the turban, or treatises on the rules for taking off the turban. So very, very specific legal topics. And there are such treatises, for example, on smoking, drinking coffee, and many other topics that could give you really an insight on what was the perception and how the laws developed in Ottoman Jerusalem in relation to these topics, because these manuscripts were copied, used, and exchanged between these families at this particular time. And only on Himmel, really, you can already have a platform that can give you research material to write about these topics and many other topics in such way. So yeah, thank you very much. And here I stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste. That's incredibly helpful. I just want to add just a quick point is that when you, so she showed you the project numbers, but I just wanted to point out that those project numbers are very useful for identifying specific manuscripts, but you have to put them in this project number field. They won't search correctly if you put them in the main search bar. So if you want to search for a specific project number, you know, ABLJ 300, for example, then you'll put it there. And you can also use that to just pull up all of the Alwaleed manuscripts, for example, by just saying ABLJ in that field. Or the alternative is to browse through the country, you know, country or city, Jerusalem, and then the Alwaleed library there. So several ways to find all of the manuscripts that that you're looking for. And in addition to searching by sort of English titles, most of the titles will be available in transliteration and in Arabic native script as well. So then I want to turn it over to Ali Diakite and Paul Naylor, who will tell you about our Mali collection.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Yes, so I'm Paul Naylor. I'm here with my colleague Ali Diakite, and together we are West African manuscript catalogers here at Himmel. So I think, as Columba mentioned, you know, if you cast your minds back a few years, you'll probably remember headlines such as these across the news media about these political instability in northern Mali, the evacuation of these manuscripts from Timbuktu in the north to the capital of Bamako. What you don't hear is what happens to these manuscripts afterwards, which is that, so in 2013, Himmel partnered with Savama, which is the NGO responsible for the evacuation effort for these manuscripts in Bamako, to digitize all of these manuscripts and eventually catalog them and have them available on our reading room. So this project is still not complete, it's still ongoing, probably to the end of next year. More than 30 collections, so this is to say 30 family libraries in Timbuktu and the surrounding regions, and this amounts to really, I think it'll be a lot more than 200,000 collection items. So this is a huge addition to Himmel. So in addition to this, Himmel has expanded the project to those libraries in Timbuktu who decided not to evacuate, who decided to kind of shelter in place their manuscripts, and this includes those collections from the town's 3 principal mosques, so the Sankore, Sidi Yahya, and Gingerbread mosques. They're all being catalogued and digitized at present. And then Himmel also expanded to Mali's other center of Islamic culture, Gianni. And here on the right, we see the digitization studio in Gianni, right next to the old mosque. So here we see, just for some context, here's Timbuktu, and Gianni is quite a bit further down the Niger River, which you see behind me actually. And you can see how, you know, from a very long time ago, Timbuktu was really connected to these trans-Saharan trade networks from the Maghreb and the wider Muslim world. It's the old mosque again. So at present, we have about 8,000 fully catalogued unique records available on vHimmel. We started with 2 collections, the Mama Hydra library, which is, so Mama Hydra is the father of Abdul Qadir Hydra, who is the head of Savama, who led the project to move these manuscripts. So his library is one of the largest, about 40,000 items, of which we've done a very small amount really. And then Abu Bakr bin Said library, again, one of the family libraries that was moved to Bamako, and this is one of the smallest, about 7,000 items. So we're kind of 2/3 done with this one. And with that, I hand over to Ali to kind of explain a bit more some details about the collections. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all, Paul. Yes, as Paul mentioned, now I'm trying to talk a bit about what we have inside of this manuscript. I will talk about the date range, the subject, and the language we have in the manuscript or the collection from Team 2. First thing I want to talk about is about the date range. The largest manuscript from Timbuktu collection is undated for some reason. We don't know exactly for now, but the remark we have, the copies was more interesting to give the month, the copies, the text, or the season sometimes, the cool season, the hot season, or the rainy season, than the years or the text. Maybe this is the culture that they was using this time, we don't know. However, we have some date range, they like 600 to the time we call the end of the Timbuktu Golden Age, or the time of the manuscript production intellectual life in Timbuktu, up to the colonial period in early 20th century. Here on the right, you can see the Adimyati poem on the name of the god. Date is May 3rd, 1657. This is the oldest date me and Paul come across for now. On the left, you can see the text Aqidat al-Awjali. This date very like I told you, in the time of the colonial period. You see here is 1942. This is a Gregorian date, and here you can see Hijri date. The written here in Hijri date. Another thing interesting I want to mention in this manuscript before I pass is this manuscript is copied by a woman. His name is Hawa Silla. This is very rare in collection. Usually we see the copy by a man, but here it's a woman copied this manuscript. Yeah. Another thing I want to mention, important thing, is the subject range. Sometimes we have a question, what do you have in Timbuktu collection? The answer is simple, like any other collection in the world. We can find anything we need. Of course, the largest text is concern Islamic text or classical Islamic text, like Quran, Tafsir al-Quran, the commentary of the Quran. You will see like Jalalain. I will show you soon one of the Jalalain text on price of the Prophet. The text is a lot of text about the price of the Prophet, like Dalail al-Khairat, etc., etc. You will see text on Malikite law. You know, Timbuktu area was very influenced by Maghreb. We can see many texts from Malikite law, like Ar-Risalat Ibn Abi Zayd, Mukhtasar Khalil, and other texts from Andalu scholar in Andalusian. Again, we have texts and poetry. We will find many texts in poetry, like pre-Islamic poetry and classical poetry, and even the local poetry texts. And after this, we have grammar. You know, in Timbuktu area, or maybe, yeah, many of them is no Arabic speaker, or Arabic is a second language they speak. For this region, they have grammar was very important in West Africa, especially in Timbuktu area. We will find many texts from Al-Ajurumiyya and the commentary of Ajurumiyya, and again Ibn Aqil and etc. And we have belief, like Aqidah, or some people say Tawheed. We have many texts because it was very important in this time, the beginning of the Islam, or after this, many people need to have Aqidah. We have texts on Sanusi. This is the star text in a collection about Tafsir or Aqidah in Sanusi. It's three texts. Sometimes it's the Aqidah al-Kubra or al-Sughra, and we have al-Wusta. And we have many supplication. We have like prayer of the prophet or prayer. We have many texts in esoteric, etc., etc. Now I will try to show you like Celeste now. Everyone want to go to today on the reading room. Me too, I want to go. Like if you want to do research quickly on Mali collection, sometimes you don't need to put anything here because Josh and Celeste all already show you. I will just select here country. You see Mali, and coming to general form, I choose Quran. We will see. We will got some results on Quran. We have more than 400 results on Quran, only Quran text. You can see here. And if you are interested in like Islamic art or West African calligraphy, we can come into the future, and yeah, we can see the Quran text with we have almost 100 texts with decoration. You can see here. It's unique. I don't want to go in because the time is a bit. There is this very good. Now I will talk a bit about language. As you know, all the manuscript from Timbuktu or the collection from Timbuktu is written in Arabic script, yeah, in Arabic language. But inside this big collection, we have some isolated text written with local language using Arabic script, what we call Ajami. In this, we can find Fulfulde, Bambara, Songhai, Tamasek, etc., etc. This is two examples I will show you about. The first one is Tafsir al-Jalalain with Tamasek gloss. Tamasek is the Tawarik language. Here we go. This is Tafsir, the commentary of the Quran in Tafsir al-Jalalain, and you can see here the red ink is the Quran itself. In the black is the commentary of al-Jalalain text, and under the line you see this is a Tamasek. Like here is easy to identify the calf with 3 dots under the calf. It's the Tamasek. I cannot tell you what it is exactly, but this is the Quran. This is the commentary here. In here you have Tamasek. The second thing I want to show you is Faida using Surah Yasin. As you know, Surah Yasin is a very important surah for many people or for some Muslim. And here, in Mali, they use it sometime, or in this region for beneficial or thing, like if someone needs something or something like this. Here, the red text. Here you see the red is the Surah Yasin. Here followed by another surah or hadith. In 3 from local region, they use here, like here, you see the Shajaratin Ismuhu Taraku, where the full Shajara Ismuhu Sira. Sira, I can identify this easily, it's the baobab tree. Here in local language, it's the baobab tree. You can use for to resolve some problem or something like this. So I will return to Paul. He can show you some highlight about our collection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Just let me just share my screen again. Yeah, I'll just in the last minute or so, I'll just show you a couple of highlights from the collection. As Ali mentioned, we have a lot of richly decorated Qur'ans. I'm just going to show you one of them. So here we see this is all using kind of local inks, locally sourced materials. So we have a lot of earth tones, is typical for these manuscripts. Here we have the Hizb marker, so to divide the Quran into Ahzab, we have these kind of medallions here. And then usually on the halfway point, the nisf of the Quran, we usually have a nice kind of geometric design to signal the half of that text. Where? Oh, here we go. Yeah, so this is again the halfway point of the text, kind of signaled with this geometric design here. Ali also talked about Dalal al-Khayrat. Dalal al-Khayrat is a famous poem on the Sirah, or the biography of Prophet Muhammad. In Timbuktu and Gianni and in the wider region, it is read on the Mawlid al-Nabi, so the Prophet's birthday, in a kind of a big public ceremony. And so the manuscripts themselves tend to have very nice decoration. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. So here we have the grave of Muhammad and some of his companions. We have this date palm here. The next one shows the mihrab of the Masjid al-Nabi, the Prophet's mosque. And it's interesting to note that the same scene is executed in very different ways. And I think this is the case for some of Himmel's other collections from Jerusalem and other areas of the Muslim world. It's a very, very similar scene, but executed in a very different way. So here we have another manuscript from Timbuktu. Again, we have Qabr al-Nabi here, and we have the date palm. On the next page, we have the mihrab, but a very, very different execution. So these are two examples of that. One thing that we have, of course, in our collection in Timbuktu is a lot of local names that have not really been recognized outside of their regions, and this includes local poets. So here, for example, we have Qasida Mukhammasa or Takhmis, so a poem with five verses from Sanba ibn Budi, and he is a Fulani scholar. We don't know exactly where he's from, but he produced a lot of these takhmis on Ta'hadir and al-Maut. So this kind of didactic poems to prepare believers for, for their deaths and make sure they were on their good behavior during their lives. And so the good thing is that with Himmel's partnership with Library of Congress, these local names are now on Library of Congress. They're searchable there. Anybody can use them for their research or if they want to standardize these names. And so every time we come across a local name that is not already on Library of Congress, Himmel will send it to Library of Congress and they will include it on their website. So the last thing I want to show you is we have a few kind of texts that are interesting in themselves. So for example, this one is it's about the Shadhali Sufi order. So it's a silsila of the founders of that order, and very nice calligraphy here. But it has a celebrity owner. So if we see on the first page, there's a note here to say that this text came from the library of Ahmadu Lobbo. So Ahmadu Lobbo was the ruler of Masina, which was a Muslim state in the Mopti region of Mali in the 19th century. So the more we work with these manuscript collections, the more kind of impressive, interesting things we're going to find. So thank you for your time, and I'll hand back to Josh.
Thank you, Paul and Ali, also very helpful. So that is kind of an overview of the Islamic collections themselves, but we do, as I mentioned, we have rich resources for Islamic studies in not specifically Islamic collections as well. And so before we wrap up, I want to turn it over to David and then Daniel, who will talk about some of those other connections that you can make to the other collections. So David, you want to start?
Okay, thanks. I just realized I was muted. So hello, everybody. My name is David Calabro. I'm the curator of Eastern Christian manuscripts at Himmel. And I'll just be showing you a few general things about our Eastern Christian collections and some highlights of the collections. So we have this table shows you a breakdown of the Eastern Christian manuscripts that are currently in the Himmel reading room, organized by country. And as you can see, Ethiopia is that was our first Eastern Christian project that we started actually microfilming at Himmel, and then we also have significant digital collections from Ethiopia. So there are over 300 repositories represented. Many of those are under the rubric of the HMML project and other projects that group together microfilmed manuscripts from various repositories. And currently, if you go into reading room, there are over 9,500 Ethiopic manuscripts, and that includes microfilms. So some of them cannot be viewed online, but you can still search the metadata for those online. And then if you're interested in any of those manuscripts, you can order, you can request that the microfilm be digitized, and we can digitize it and put it online. Lebanon is our next highest group of manuscripts on Himmel. There are 21 repositories, over 8,000 manuscripts in reading room right now. We also have many manuscripts from Iraq and Turkey, and many of those are manuscripts in Syriac, in East Syriac from Iraq, and in West Syriac from the Tur Abdin region in Turkey, and yes, and also large numbers from Syria and from Ukraine, and also from Romania. We have other Eastern Christian groups of manuscripts, and many of them, most of them from Ukraine, are in Old Church Slavonic, or rather Church Slavonic. We have one Coptic collection from Egypt that we're currently in the process of digitizing, and that collection includes manuscripts both in Arabic and in Coptic. That's the Saint Macarius Monastery from Wadi Natrun. The question has been asked, does the digitization of manuscripts really affect qualitatively what we can do as scholars, the kinds of research that we can do, or is it just a matter of quantity? Celeste and Ali and Paul have already touched on this issue quite a bit, but I'll add that another thing that's interesting that you can do with digitized manuscripts that would be very hard or impossible to do otherwise is to get a bird's eye view of the composition of collections, and even zooming out further than that, to get a sense of manuscript distributions by region, and zooming back to the level of the collection. For example, you can, with assembling all the manuscripts from a particular library in one place, you can go through those manuscripts and get a sense of the composition of the collection in terms of Islamic manuscripts and Christian manuscripts. There are Islamic manuscripts in these Eastern Christian collections, as there are Eastern Christian manuscripts in some of the Islamic collections. And more so, I think, with the Islamic manuscripts in the Eastern Christian collections. So there are very interesting things you can do there, looking at the composition of the libraries, which, you know, prior to the digitization of manuscripts, scholars in the West would need to rely on the big European libraries, the British Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and so on. And these are manuscripts basically taken out of their original contexts. So here with the work that we do at Himmel, you can really get a sense of how the manuscripts look in their libraries where they're originally and still held. Celeste showed you some of the language distribution for the Islamic collections. These are the languages that are found among the Eastern Christian collections. The greatest number are in Arabic, and this is only the Eastern Christian manuscripts in Arabic. So there are over 10,000 of those from our Eastern Christian collections. Syriac, there are over almost 6,000. And then there are many in Ge'ez. There are actually much more than that, but this is based on the manuscripts that are currently cataloged in Himmel. So there's much more than that that haven't been cataloged in Ge'ez. And then, of course, Church Slavonic, Armenian. We have a lot of manuscripts in Neo-Aramaic, which is a great resource for research if you're interested in that topic. And an interesting thing about the Eastern Christian collections is that there are a lot of manuscripts in different kinds of Garshuni. Josh mentioned this. Garshuni is basically usually Arabic, but really any language written in Syriac script. And so the highest number are in Arabic Garshuni, Arabic written in Syriac script. At the top of this slide, you can see an example of that. This is from one of our manuscripts. I believe this one is from one of the repositories in Turkey. And what it says there is, فَلَمَّا جَبَلَ اللَّهُ Adam fi wasat al-firdaus, when God created Adam in the midst of paradise. But it's written in Syriac. So if you don't read Syriac, then it would be hard to read that. And that's probably a lot of the reason why Garshuni was used. So other than Arabic Garshuni, we have a lot of manuscripts in Turkish that are written in Syriac script, Turkish Garshuni, so Kurdish Garshuni, Armenian Garshuni, Malayalam Garshuni, Persian Garshuni, and I also include here Armeno-Turkish, which is a similar phenomenon, Turkish written in Armenian script. So I think our resources at Himmel for studying the Garshuni phenomenon are quite significant. This is a good place to go if you're interested in these kinds of linguistic phenomena. Now I'll show you some highlights of the Eastern Christian collections. And Father Columba mentioned that we don't cherry pick in the digitization of manuscripts, but I admit I did do some cherry picking and picking some manuscripts to show you. And so I'll be showing you the more significant Eastern Christian manuscripts that we have, and also focusing a little bit more on manuscripts that are useful for studying relationships between Christians and Muslims in the Middle East. So this is one of our more famous Ethiopic manuscripts. This what you're seeing here is a page from the canon table, Eusebian canon tables in the Garima Gospels from Abba Garima Monastery in Tigray Province, Ethiopia. The date is uncertain, but it's very early for an Ethiopic manuscript, 6th to 10th century. And here, this is, I'm showing you on the outside, on the two outside images, you can see two different pages from two different manuscripts from the St. Macarius Monastery in Wadi Natrun, Egypt. This is the one on the left, ABMQ 18, is Gospel of John, and the one on the right is a gospel book that includes all four Gospels. And these are both in Coptic with Arabic translation arranged in parallel columns. And what I wanted to show you here is both of these manuscripts are from the 14th century. But if you look at the decoration, you can see that the manuscripts have been decorated using a very typical Mamluk style of decoration. So the carpet page on the right and the headpiece on the right with the vignette look very much like Mamluk decoration. And so in the middle, I show you a Quran from the British Library, also from the same period in Egypt. And this is a manuscript from Mardin, Turkey, from the Chaldean Cathedral in Mardin, CCM 398. The manuscript is dated 1583. And this manuscript is interesting because it contains the sole manuscript witness of the disputation between a Muslim and a monk of Beit Halleh, one of an important genre of text, recording disputations between, giving a narrative of a disputation between a Muslim and a Christian. And these are really important texts for understanding the theological debates that went on in the Middle East in pre-modern times, and also getting a sense of the way that different faiths were studying each other's scriptures. It's very interesting to see how much they knew about each other. This is one of our more famous, more unique texts that we've digitized at Himmel. This is the only complete manuscript witness of the Chronicle of Michael the Great. He lived at the end of the 12th century, and his world history is very important primary historical source for the Crusades. And this manuscript is dated 1598. It comes from the Syrian Orthodox Archdiocese of Aleppo collection from the Church of St. George in Aleppo. This is a interesting text in Garshuni. So this is from that same Archdiocese collection in Aleppo. Again, from the Church of St. George, dated 1694. And as you can see, it's in Garshuni, but the text is the story of Sinbad the Sailor. And this is actually a very important manuscript witness for the story of Sinbad. As you may know, manuscripts that include stories that later were incorporated into the Arabian Nights tradition, dating before the 18th century, are particularly valuable because this is before the Arabian Nights became a thing in the West, and before the manuscript tradition for the Arabian Nights goes crazy as Middle Eastern copyists were trying to meet a European demand for manuscripts with more Arabian Nights closer to the 1001 that are promised in the title. And finally, this is one of particular interest to me. This is a manuscript from the Church of the 40 Martyrs in Mardin, Turkey, dated 1881, and this contains, it's a theological miscellany, but it contains the story of Solomon and the palace of Shaddad ibn Ad, which very interestingly is a Christian text, sort of, in that it appears in Christian manuscripts only. That's the only context that it's attested in so far. But the story is very thoroughly Islamic in its style and motifs and its intertextuality. I'm actually preparing a critical edition of this text, and it's interesting because this gives you a view of what you can do with digital manuscripts, or the way in which this digitization of manuscripts breaks open research. Prior to our digitization efforts, there were basically 10 to 12 manuscripts that were known in the scholarly world of this text. Now the number has doubled, and the second half of the doubling of that is all from our collections at Himmel. So the story is very interesting. It tells a story about Solomon and his entourage of counselors, of humans, animals, birds, and jinn, and they would go on journeys on a impossibly large bed of silk, as the wind would carry them to different locations. And in this story, they visit a palace submerged under the sand. And with the help of a 1,500-year-old eagle, they determined that the door of the palace is submerged under the sand. And so Solomon commands the wind to blow on the sand and uncover the door. Now, in this image, you can see on the right-hand side, this is the script that prevails throughout most of the manuscript. On the left, you can see that the scribe has gone into a different form of the script with deeper dips of the pen, and or deeper kind of a deeper engagement downward with the pen, and this is the part of the story where the wind is blowing on the palace to uncover the door. So the scribe is basically graphically imitating the action of the wind on the sand with the script. I think it's a beautiful example of how sometimes a print edition just doesn't represent fully what's going on in the manuscript. This would be very hard to replicate in print. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions about our Eastern Christian collections, feel free to email me. My email address is shown there.
All right, thank you, David. So last but not least, Daniel Gullo is going to tell us a little bit about collections from Malta and how they might be useful for Islamic studies.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, everybody. I'm going to be introducing the collection, and in many ways, just to double check that, get my screen sharing here. Oops. Is that working for everyone?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thank you. It's really a pleasure to talk about Malta and particularly its relationship with the Muslim world, because it's one of the most understudied part of my collections, and yet it has a magnificent, it is a magnificent resource for studying the Muslim world, particularly in the early modern Mediterranean. And so I'm really grateful to have this chance today to do this with you. To kind of begin, we need to talk about the collection as a part of like two parts. On the one hand, we do have materials that are written in Arabic and in Turkish in the collections. Though they comprise a small percentage of the overall collection in and of itself, they are there, and I will talk about why they're there and the importance of them being there in a little bit. Those materials that are written in Arabic or in Turkish are most commonly correspondence or legal documents. And there's a reason for that, because of the nature of Malta as a center of international trade, which I'll talk about also in a brief moment. We will also have literary texts, grammars, religious texts, and translations of Western texts into Arabic, largely translations of Christian materials into Arabic, which were used for missionary activity into the Middle East, particularly in Lebanon and in Syria in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. But if we move away simply from those things that are written in Arabic or Turkish, it's one of the largest repositories for studying the interactions of the Muslim world and the West that you can access, not only online, but locally here at Himmel. We literally have thousands of documents, if not tens of thousands of documents within archival repositories, including correspondence, legal documents, histories and memorandum exchanged between ambassadors, military records, international relations. One of the largest online areas to study Mediterranean slavery in the 18th and 17th century, commerce, treatises on Muslim life from Western travelers going to North Africa and the Middle East, literary texts about that, Christian parishes from North Africa where the records were transported back into Malta, one of the largest online collections of Mediterranean maps centered on Malta, but also of the Mediterranean. A new and very important collection of art and drawings, particularly those dealing with Orientalism, that is Western artists traveling in the Middle East or North Africa, and translations of Western texts into Arabic. To kind of give you a sense of both what's there and what is not there. So we need to talk about the Malta collections from two perspectives. The first of those are Malta in of itself as an island located about 175 kilometers north of Tunisia, right in the middle of the Mediterranean. And Malta in the Muslim world it was under Muslim control from 872, roughly the end of the 11th century. And what you have here, unfortunately, is a complete lack of documentation for this period, unless that documentation survives in North African libraries. We have no written records from this period in Malta, except for lapidary evidence, but no written materials survive. And unfortunately, the same can be said for both the Norman and Angevin control. We have no written evidence on the island of Malta through those two periods. Again, if we do have documents from them, they will be found in Italy or in France, but not in Malta of itself. In fact, the earliest written records from Malta come from the period when the Aragonese controlled the island. For those who are familiar with Mediterranean history, Aragon, which is the kingdom of eastern Spain, comprising Catalonia, Aragon, and Valencia, had a major political expansion in the Mediterranean, stretching its control not only from Spain, but into city citadels in North Africa, southern Italy, and into Greece. So it was a Mediterranean empire, and it's appropriate to call it there. And we start beginning to have documentary evidence that we preserve from that period, largely from the 15th and early 16th century. And from the standpoint of how that interacts with the Muslim world, that is largely working with trade and trade agreements and the buying and selling of slaves. So that's the information you would find. So that's like the early medieval period of Malta, not so much except until you get to the 15th century. But from the standpoint of Middle Eastern history, it's also important to note that the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, also known as the Order of Malta, came to the island of Malta in 1530. However, the order itself originated in Jerusalem at the end of the 11th century with the conquest of the city and the establishment of the Crusader kingdoms. And Malta preserves all of the original documents from the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, from the central organization of the order, from its period in the Middle East. This means that we have in our collection now all of its records dealing with when it was established in Jerusalem through the end of the 12th century, as the archive migrated to Accra, then to Cyprus, and then to Rhodes. We are talking about roughly 700 volumes of archival evidence dealing with the period of the order's history as it formed part of the Crusader kingdoms until Rhodes was conquered, and then it migrated to Malta in 1530. Those collections do not preserve a lot of material in Arabic or in Turkish, but it produced a massive amount of evidence with regard to the historical development of the Crusader kingdoms during the medieval period. So if you're studying anything with regard to Christian-Muslim relationships in the Middle East in the medieval period, it's one of the most important resources that exists today. To that, we can then add nearly, at this point, 16,000 volumes of archival material dealing with the period underneath the Knights from the 16th to the end of the 18th century. Malta established itself as not only a center of commerce, but as the primary bastion for defending Christian maritime activity in the Mediterranean outside of Venice and Genoa and the cities of Naples. The wealth of the documents here is hard to underestimate. And they are engaging in active correspondence with North Africa, Alexandria, and in Constantinople, in addition to all of the major port areas where diplomatic outposts were established. In addition to that, they are engaging with correspondence with continental Europe about the affairs of the Mediterranean. So you can go there and see all of this playing out because of the close commercial and military activity that was taking place. And to end, we also have records that go into both the French period and the British period. The Order of St. John of Jerusalem was expelled from Malta in 1798. This period has a very interesting look at how the British used North Africa in order to help remove the French from the island of Malta and then establish a colony that lasted through 1964. So those people who are interested in British colonialism and its effect on the Muslim world, and also the British colonialism and the growth of Orientalism as part of the 19th century and 18th century, we do have both art and documentary evidence that charts that problem. Like David, I want to kind of briefly point out some of the most key collections that will be of use to you if you are interested in these topics. Perhaps the most important of which is the newly digitized collection of the Lettere Consulari funds at the Cathedral Archives in Mdina. This is 33 boxes of diplomatic correspondence related to the French charge d'affaires in North Africa, Turkey, and the Levant. So you need to think about this collection not as the French consul general sitting in Malta writing letters out and having copies. This is really about the collection of the documents coming in addition to copies of letters going out. Any major port in the Mediterranean, whether it's in North Africa or the Middle East or in Turkey, even up into the Black Sea area, will have correspondence with in this collection. There are over 47 cities corresponding with the French Consul General in Malta. And so it is a spectacular collection, largely in French, but also in other languages, including Turkish, Arabic, Greek, and Syriac, and Armenian. So this collection is not only online, but there is a modern critical edition of this correspondence in 6 volumes. So it's a very good collection to look at for late 17th and 18th century diplomatic activity, in addition to issues of commerce, trade, and slave activity in the Mediterranean. One of the areas that has received attention, but is also still understudied, are the archives of the Inquisition of Malta with regard to the role of Turkish and Arabic materials. There are at least 66 volumes that have Turkish and Arabic materials in this collection, largely dealing with trials for magic or apostasy or Muslim practices located in the island that are found within people who have been accused of either practicing things related to what is perceived to be being a Muslim. That could be diet or prayer rituals at distinct parts of the day, but also because of the major Muslim slave population living in Malta, which could average anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 individuals at any time, comprising about 10% of the total population. There was an exchange of ideas, medical practices, other forms of sayings and so forth. And this could be picked up by the Inquisition and then put forward before the tribunal. Another collection of importance, which again is never been really studied, are the archives of the Confraternity of Charity and related archives dealing with the redemption of slaves throughout the Mediterranean into Malta and the subsequent use of Muslim slaves to repatriate Christian slaves back into the island. We have over 120 volumes with information with regard to slave redemption, 11 with Turkish and Arabic legal documents, testifying to the international economy of the slave trade in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. It's a spectacular resource for that study, and again, ripe for dissertation research. These collections involve multiple languages. They are largely in Italian, French, and Spanish, but also with Turkish and Arabic documents. A similar collection to be found are in the Magna Curia Castellanii and the Law Court's miscellaneous funds. These are courts of civil and criminal cases, many of them dealing with commerce. There are over 33 volumes of Turkish and Arabic materials. As Turkish and North African merchants would engage in legal actions in order to have their materials returned to them, which they felt was seized illegally by the corsairs operating out of Malta in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. So it's a remarkable place to study how different legal traditions engaged with legal documents over vast distances and therefore authenticated the legal traditions of external jurisdictions within their own internal law courts. Joshua White at Virginia has done a lot of work on this, and so has Molly Green, but there's just so much more to be done. They're really scratching the surface of what's truly available there. Finally, there is a small collection there was a school of Arabic studies designed to do mission activity in North Africa and the Middle East, and even extending down into Ethiopia, led by the Franciscan and Jesuit missions in Malta. There are manuscripts there that were prepared. We have microfilmed about 25 of these. To my knowledge, there's probably another 100 or 200 of these that were never microfilmed, which could be the source of future digitization projects in Malta, really focusing on the kind of the Eastern connections and the School of Arabic Studies that was discontinued in the 18th century. And finally, there are some other collections to talk about in Malta that have not been digitized or microfilmed by the Malta Studies Center. These include over 300 Arabic manuscripts located at the National Library of Malta, and another set of anywhere from, I think, between 30 and 50 located at the Church of Porto Salvo. In addition to that, we have not digitized either the Tribunal Armamentorum or the Consolato del Mare, the most important maritime courts in Malta that deal with issues of both piracy, corsair activity, and trade relations in the Mediterranean. One of the most intact records of maritime activity through the early modern period outside of Venice, Barcelona, or Naples. And so with that, I will leave lots and lots of time, I hope, to let people discuss the magnificent opportunities of doing research at Himmel.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks everyone for sticking around. We have probably up to 15 minutes now for any questions that people may have. If you want to either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to answer them as we can. But I hope that there's some inspiration here for your future research, and I hope if we can be helpful in any way, then feel free to contact us.
Let me quickly jump in and say thank you for 7 wonderful presentations. I just want to say that if you would like to ask a question, you can use the raise hand function through the reaction button in the bottom of your screen, or you can, I think as Joshua mentioned, put your question in the chat. But while we're waiting for questions to come in, I actually have a quick question for you, Joshua, or David, you talked about the manuscripts in Gershoni, and specifically a manuscript on medicine by Ibn Sina. And I think, David, you showed how the vastness of these Gershoni manuscripts. And I was just wondering, to what extent are these Gershoni manuscripts, to what extent do they pertain to, say, Islamic texts? Are they mostly Christian? Do you have any idea about the proportion?
Yeah, David, you want to take that?
Okay, sure. So proportionally, I think truly Islamic texts written in Gershuni, the percentage is small, but it is significant. So there are Islamic texts written in Gershuni among our collections, many of them. And in general, I think you find the kinds of texts, medical manuscripts, philosophy, the kinds of texts that carry across religious boundaries very easily, because they're not theologically situated. But there are, I know there are quotations from the Quran in Gershuni that are found in our manuscripts. There are sort of Christian commentaries on the Quran in Gershuni. So this is like when your Muslim neighbor quotes this passage of the Quran to you, this is what you can say, this is how you can interpret it in a Christian light or respond. And so, yeah, they do exist. I can't give an exact figure on that, but it's definitely worthy of research. There is stuff there.
So much.
Yeah, I know we have at St. Mark's Monastery, there's a nice Gershuni copy of Ibn Abi Uslaybiya's Uyun al-Atibba, Lives of the Physicians. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely the minority of the Gershuni texts that are actual Islamic works, but there are some.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's a question here from Monica Green in the chat. She says, I'm a non-Arabophone, but I would love to be able to refer people to the collection to look for materials, especially in medicine, and talk about how the indexing works. Yeah, I can just show you briefly. Let me see. So let's say, first of all, we do have a genre for medical works. So if you're specifically interested in just finding things that are medical, you can do medical works here and search, and it'll bring up 97 records, but many of those are in Latin or Western languages. Maybe you only want things that are written in Arabic script. You can do that in the writing systems here. And that'll just show you things that are in Arabic, Ottoman Turkish, even Persian, although we have less of that. But so then maybe you don't want these microfilms, so you might unselect that so that you just have things that you can see pictures of. So then we have, for example, here, we've got a nice early copy, 1171, of Ibn Sina's Al-Qanun fi Tib, one of the most important medical works, both in Arabic and in Western Europe. And so you can look at the catalog record here. You see the author's name in both Roman and native script. You see the title in transliteration in native script, and then in English, Canon of Medicine. And so all of that is searchable. So for one thing, you can just click on this uniform title and you'll find all other copies of Al-Qanun fi Tib. So that includes Latin copies in microfilm. It also includes Arabic and Arabic and Latin copies, both in microfilm and digitized. So then, but if you also just say, Avicenna and medicine, then you'll find things like his poem on medicine, Al-Arjuza fi Tib, that sort of thing. So all of that is searchable. If you just want the Qanun, you can type that in transliteration and you'll find it, or you can type it in Arabic script and you'll find it that way as well. So yeah, all of that should be, you know, searchable in ways that are very user friendly, hopefully. Oh yeah, and Paul's pointing out that we have a series of kind of blog posts on our website about medicine specifically that we're continuing to put out. Yeah, music is a little bit trickier. There you can search for manuscripts that have like actual music notation, and there are some of those. Many of the Latin manuscripts, but we also have some if you just want digitized ones. Then you'll find some. And for example, from this monastery in Lebanon, there's a number of kind of Greek and Arabic hymnals and things like that. But you can also just search the word music. Oh yeah, and Daniel points out scientific works is also useful for medicine. But you can search for music. We have texts on music theory in Arabic and in Persian, you know, a variety of things. So.
I think that we have a question from Akram Bey.
Yes, thank you for the interesting webinar. And I have actually two questions. First one regarding the catalog records. Are they available through WorldCat search or CLC WorldCat search? And second question about the access to the full text, full digitized copies of the manuscripts.
Yeah, the records are not in WorldCat or any other external database like that. So you'd have to search it within our system. The second question about access to them, yeah. So in general, we don't provide like downloadable files of the digital images because ownership rights remain with the libraries that hold the manuscripts. And so in any case where we want to provide images to someone, we have to get permission from the library for that. And that's part of the way that we maintain our agreements with them. But if you are working on something, you know, in your research and you need downloaded images, or especially if you want to publish some images, then there are forms available on the Himmel website, image reproduction, manuscript image order, permission to publish request forms. So you can find all of those there.
Thank you.
I had a question in the chat about the Library of Congress authorities. While we are a member of the program of cooperative cataloging, and so I do contribute records, new records, almost daily to the Library of Congress, and thus they funnel their way into VIAF. We also do make use of the Library of Congress established ones that are already there, so that people who are used to a certain way of referring to a person can find them in our system. Sometimes we have better information because our catalogers are doing direct primary source research and secondary research in other languages that are not always accessible. And so we will also have name forms that both name forms will be searchable in our system, the Library of Congress name form and also our display name form, which might have extra dates, might have more correct spelling, et cetera, because sometimes the rules of the Library of Congress prohibit changing their access points because they don't want to confuse the issue, right?
I think we have a question in the chat here from Professor Pfeiffer.
Daniel, I think this maybe is mostly in reference to the things you were talking about.
The first thing I would say is I think once I make a brief comment, I think it would be important also for you, Josh, and David and Ali to talk about the rich tradition of magic, or we'll call sometimes scientific materials in your own collections too. And I say that because from the standpoint of the the date of the materials, the bulk of the things that are related to the legal proceedings are going to be 16th through the 18th century because of the nature of when the Inquisition was established. Correspondence will be largely from the 12th through the 20th century. So these collections are massive. There's just no other way of talking about it. They're at the size of national archives. So it's almost better, I would say, to contact me in particular. From the standpoint of the apostasy material, there have been several scholars who have worked on that. Probably Eric Dursteller is the most recent one who's really delved into those collections. Eric Dursteller at BYU. Searching them is not easy. There is no modern cataloging in Malta. So whatever I am doing now is being done for the very, very first time. There is no catalog for these materials. And when you're dealing with trying to create finding aids for archival material, with the quantity that I have, I'm mostly doing basic finding aids. Going and trying to do subject headings for court cases that could be number into the thousands is almost impossible. So I would really encourage you to contact me to set up a kind of a virtual appointment. And then also, if we can find the things you're looking for, to apply for a fellowship to come. The reason why I mentioned to have the other curators speak about the issue of magic is because those materials which are used in the proceedings are very similar to the things that you find in their collections. So they're either being brought into the island or being made locally, but they're based upon the traditions used in North Africa in particular. So you can actually see like a magical amulet found in North African or Timbuktu collections look almost identical to what you find in the Malta tribunal. So I'll stop there. I know it's not a really great answer, but it's just the nature, the state of the burden that we face with our work.
Yeah, Ali and Paul already alluded a little bit to some of the fawaid, this kind of short texts that have a sort of magical element to them and incorporate local sort of pharmaceutical and magical traditions. Yeah, I mean, all I would say is that there's many that are digitized, and we do have a genre for magical texts that you can use to kind of narrow that down. There are also more that are in, for example, the Austrian National Library microfilm collection. So yeah, depending on what specifically you're looking at, it may be, I think there's a large number that are digital. So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on that.
I'll just throw in that because this is an area that's of particular interest to me. We have so at the Houghton Library there at Harvard, there are 4 copies of the Syriac Book of Protection, which was a book of charms that would circulate in codex form, mostly in northern Iraq and Iran, and you know, from the late 18th to the early 19th century. And at Himmel, we have, as of last week, 3 copies of, we used to have 2, and then a third one was discovered by one of our catalogers, James Walters, last week, of the Book of Protection. So it's a really good resource. And this is another way that, in a sense, we're kind of joining collections. So the things that are available at the Houghton Library can now be sort of compared with what we have at Himmel.
We're sort of running against the clock here, but any more questions for our guests? So Johannes, do you want to wrap up or?
Sounds good. Let's call it a day. Thank you all so much. First of all, to our presenters for truly marvelous presentations. I think we can only try to imagine the ideas you've sparked in our audience, and that you will continue to spark as people learn about Himmel and perhaps review today's session. And thank you all for joining us today. If you are not yet subscribing, have a look at the Alwaleed's program's website. More events of this kind will follow, and we hope to see you then again. In advance, have a lovely weekend ahead.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Johannes, and thanks to everyone for having us. It's been an honor to share our work with you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you to the folks at Himmel. And as Johannes said, please check out the Alwaleed Islamic Studies program website. It's just islamicstudies.harvard.edu. You could also follow us on Twitter. We're at Harvard Islamic. We also launched a new podcast recently, so if you want to check that out as well. But thank you everyone for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at another workshop in the near future.